Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, COVID-19 Information for Tribally Designated Housing Entities. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. All audio lines have been muted. We will only be accepting chat questions for today's event. You may submit a question via the chat at any time during today's presentation and will be addressed during the Q&A portion of today's call. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. With that, I'll turn the call over to Hunter Kurtz, Assistant Secretary of Public and Indian Housing.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us on this call. Again, my name is Hunter Kurtz. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing. A lot's happened since our last call, and we wanted to update you and bring you together to just tell you a little about what's going on and how we're moving forward with the CARES Act that was signed recently. Today, I'm joined by my General Deputy Assistant Secretary, Dominic Blum, and Heidi Frechette, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Native American Programs. Also joining us today is Tony Walters. He's the Executive Director of the National American Indian Housing Council, and you're going to have a chance to hear from him in just a few minutes. But let me update you on some of the supplemental funding things that have taken place. If we can go to the next slide, please. As you are probably aware, on March 27th, President Trump signed the CARES Act into law. This is a bill that's entitled the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It provides around $2.2 trillion for assisting the nation during this pandemic. The CARES Act provides additional funding for HUD and TDHE to prepare and get ready and deal with this pandemic, as well as providing us with a broad group of waivers and other things that we can use. Specifically, we received $300 million allocation in TDHE for tribes, and I think you're probably aware as of this morning, we were able to award $200 million through our formula under the Native American Housing Block Grant Program. And we have another $100 million that we'll be getting out in the future with the Indian Community Development Block Grant Program. But one of the things we're really excited about, not just the funding, and I mentioned this earlier, is the waivers. The waivers provide us the opportunity to do some broad blanket waivers for the tribes and the TDHEs to make it easier for you all to do your jobs. In addition to the funding we've received through we got this funding and we've got the waivers, which we're all excited about. And the notice to providing these waivers should come out hopefully in about a week. Finally, the Act also imposes a moratorium on foreclosures and foreclosure-related evictions under the Section 184 and 184A Loan Guarantee Program, and provides borrowers experiencing financial hardship caused by COVID-19 the right to request and receive forbearance relief. More details on the Section 184 forbearance relief will be published in the near future. I recognize that we're all dealing with challenging times as you work to maintain your operations to support families that have been financially impacted by COVID-19, as well as the impact that it's had just on all of us in our normal everyday lives. And please know that we are dedicated to helping and assisting you and working hand in hand with you in this process. Yesterday, we heard from some industry leaders and tribal housing associations provide an update on the CARES Act, and we responded to their questions. And we put together FAQs, and we'll continue to update those based on the questions that we received at the last meeting, as well as the questions that we receive at this meeting today. And really, I just stress from the bottom of my heart, our number one priority is ensuring the health and safety of the individuals who depend on our programs. And I know that's yours as well. And, everything we can do, we will try to do to help you and achieve that goal. So I want to just thank you for the effort you guys are doing. And we're excited to talk to you some more about these about what this CARES Act provides and what we'll be doing in the future. But I'm going to turn over the presentation now to Tony Walters, who is from the National American Indian Housing Council. He's the Executive Director there, and give you some remarks. Tony?
Thanks, Hunter. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate HUD letting us speak a little bit on the call today. Really just want to start by thanking HUD for their work the last couple of weeks in getting ready, and helping tribes get prepared for a lot of what's going on now, and being able to get money out the door that Congress has appropriated for a lot of these issues. I've been in D.C. working on a lot of tribal ward calls related to the COVID-19 legislation, and I think the money coming out of HUD is probably some of the fastest money that we've seen coming out of the entire COVID package going into the tribal community. So that's been really helpful, and certainly appreciate Hunter and Heidi's work and the whole team at HUD being able to do that. As far as NEHC is concerned, we're really just trying to be a good repository for all of this information. There's tons of information out there that we can share, whether it's information from HUD intended for our tribal housing programs, whether it's updates on other acts of Congress or other issues that are ongoing in D.C. that could lead to other resources for tribal housing programs being available. It's really what I think our goal at NHC is. We're going to be creating a new web page on our website that will contain a lot of these links to different things related to COVID-19, and really try to probably post a lot of documents that we've seen. A lot of tribes are going to be updating, policies, lead policies, different types of documents and plans and policies that they need to update in response to a lot of the things they're seeing in their community. So we're going to try to collect a lot of those as we get them from tribes and that are willing to share those, and really use those as templates or guides for other tribes who may find those helpful as a resource. So that's really one of our main goals from the NHC's perspective. We're going to be reissuing our survey that we started about 2 weeks ago. We had a good number of responses to the survey, and it was asking about impacts to tribal housing programs and your communities generally. A lot of people responded to that already, but I think a lot's changed in the last couple of weeks, so we're going to reissue that survey and probably send out a few reminders over the next week just to try to learn more about what's going on in all of your individual communities back home. With that, we also had a legislative committee call that we host monthly. We did that yesterday, actually, but we had to cut it short, so we're going to be hosting another one of those next week, talking about a lot of the same things that you'll hear about today, but also any updates between now and next week. And then we'll also go over updates with regards to regular issues on the Hill and possibly a fourth COVID-19 package that may work. So certainly want to make sure tribes are included in all of that. And she's going to help do our part, but we really just want to make sure people are able to join these types of calls, share these information with one another, and learn kind of the latest updates. So again, certainly appreciate HUD's really prioritizing tribal issues for this, having these types of calls to get everyone informed. Certainly appreciate that. And again, just want to echo what Hunter said about thanking all of you guys that are on the call and the work you're doing in your homes. It's a stressful time. It's a hard time having to learn about all this and be able to respond and share that information with members of your community. So you guys are doing a lot of hard work, a lot of great work, and certainly appreciate that. And I'll be monitoring all the questions that come through, and we'll work with HUD to see, make sure we can get them all answered, if not on the call, and another way, either an FAQ or on one of NEHC's calls in the future. With that, again, just thank everyone for taking time out this afternoon, and I'll turn it back over to Hunter and HUD team.
Thank you, Tony, and again, thank you for being on the call with us. I'm now going to turn this over to Heidi, who's going to talk about some of the and go through the slide presentation we have.
Great. Thank you so much, Hunter. Thank you. And thank you, Hunter, for your leadership, and Dominique Blom, the GDAS, for their leadership through this all. I think through that strong leadership, as Hunter said, we've been able to get funding out in a little under less than a week than when the bill was signed into law. So that doesn't just happen magically. It takes strong leadership. So thank you so much, Hunter and Dominique, for your leadership on this. So everyone, thank you for joining us. As you all probably know, I'm Heidi Frechette, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Native American Programs. And I want to start out by saying I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy as we work to help Indian country in fighting this pandemic. And before I get started, I want to provide a brief update on the questions that we received during our call on March 20th, and the many questions, great questions, we received since then. So ONAP has published a second round of FAQs that are posted at www.hud.gov/coronavirus. these FAQs provide a more detailed response to the questions you posed during the webinar and those that we were unable to address during the last webinar due to time constraints. Additionally, we are currently vetting a third round of FAQs, and we will get those posted hopefully by next week. So I'd like to encourage you all to continue to send your questions to us at codetalk@hud.gov, and we'll make sure that we address them as they come in. So next slide, please. As Hunter mentioned, ONAP received $300 million in supplemental funding for tribes and TDHEs under the CARES Act, and I want to give you some idea of where we are in the process. ONAP staff are currently drafting an IHBG implementation notice for the $200 million from the CARES Act funding that will be available for all grantees. As Hunter mentioned, the allocations went out late this morning, so you all should have that information and be aware of the allocations that are coming. The funds are intended to prepare for, respond to coronavirus, including maintaining normal operations, and the key is those impacted by COVID-19. So the implementation notice will outline the process for accessing these funds, and our goal is to have this published in the next week or so, as soon as we can. Next slide, please. Hunter also mentioned that we received $100 million in the imminent threat funding under the Indian Community Development Block Grant, and these funds will be dispersed on a first-come, first-served, non-competitive basis to eligible applicants. Again, ONAP staff are working on drafting a separate ICDBG implementation notice that outlines the application process for these funds. So I ask you to keep on a lookout for both the IHBG and the ICDBG notice. Next slide, please. I also wanted to restate that the Section 184 and 184A homeowners, there is a foreclosure and eviction relief in the CARES Act, and it provides specific language for forbearance relief up to 180 days, as well as a temporary moratorium of 120 days on eviction for non-payment of rent for federally backed mortgages. So we are working on further guidance for this program as well, and it'll be forthcoming soon. Next slide. And finally, the CARES Act provided broad authority for HUD to publish regulatory and statutory waivers to get funds out as quickly as possible. There are a lot of moving parts, as you've noticed, the implementation notices, the waiver notices, and running the formula. But our team is working day in and day out, nights and weekends, to ensure that you all have access to these funds and resources as soon as possible, because our number one goal, as it is yours, is to ensure the health and safety of our elders, our families, and our community members. So with that, thank you for joining us, and I want to turn it over to Jada Tawa, Director of Office of Performance and Planning, to provide us with an update and respond to your questions. So please enter your questions in the chat box. I see there's a lot of good ones coming in already, so that we can address them at the end. Thank you. Jad?
Hello, everybody. This is Jad Tawa. I'm the Director of Performance and Planning in ONAP. I want to emphasize and reiterate the questions are starting to come in, and that's great. Let me just say again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat function in the chat box, and we'll try to run through them. What I'm going to do is try to address just a couple of, just a couple of questions that we've received multiple times since the last time we had this call, and I'll try to address them. And then I guess we'll go ahead and start addressing the ones that are being typed in. So while I'm talking, think about questions you have and type them in, and I'll try to address them. So the first question we've been getting a lot, and Heidi kind of touched on this, is how are we going to make the new IHBG CARES Act funds available? We are working very, very hard right now on figuring out a streamlined process to get funding to you, and we are working days, nights, weekends to try to develop everything that we need to develop to make sure we can get this funding out as quickly as possible. As you know, we published the allocations today. Shortly after that, I think you should expect, number one, a waiver notice, a notice that outlines all of the waivers and alternative requirements that we are going to issue associated with this funding, this new funding. And then the second piece you should expect to see is an implementation notice that will lay out what you have to do in order to get access to this funding. We are mindful of all the disruption that is happening right now and all the practical limitations for you being able to operate normally. So we're taking all of that into account as we're crafting the process. And I'll just say, look out for that. We're still developing it. We're still clearing it, but look out for that to be coming out in the near future. Another question we have been getting often is, can we use our current IHBG money to serve over-income families for any sort of COVID-19 related purposes? Right now, until additional waivers are issued, the normal rules for IHBG are going to apply, which means you can serve, up to 10% with up to 10% of your grant, people who are between 80% and 100% of area median income. You need to get HUD approval to serve people over 100% of area median income. We are looking at possibly this particular area. Stay tuned. We'll have more information in the future in terms of additional flexibility. But the current rules stand until you see additional waivers published. Another big question that we have gotten multiple times in the past couple of weeks is the loss of program income. Because of rent relief that you all are providing to your tenants, or in some cases even mandated rent relief and things like moratoriums and on evictions and foreclosures, people are seeing a significant drop in program income that they normally rely on for operations. I think the way I would think about this is the following. The new money is going to provide some level of relief in this particular area. You are going to, once you get your new money, then you get housing block grant funding, you're going to get additional funding to spend on administrative and planning expenses. And also, the money is intended to, as Heidi said, maintain normal operations during the period that the IHBG program is impacted by COVID-19. So this money can be used for operating expenses and covering expenses that you would normally pay with your IHBG program, but because of limited resources, you can't. So hopefully the funding that is coming is going to help address that issue. I don't think we would allow tribes and TDHE to draw down this new money and just call it replacement program income. I'm not sure that's an eligible use of funds, but we will certainly provide additional guidance in this area. Okay, those are the three big questions that have come up multiple times since the last time we talked. So I'm going to turn it over to Neil, and then Neil is going to run through questions that have been typed in, and I'll do my best to try to answer them. If I can't answer any of these on the fly, we'll take them into consideration and develop FAQs.
Perfect. We have a number of questions that have come in through the chat. The first question we've received is, will we be able to download a copy of the presentation that's been shared today?
I think that's a question for you, Neil.
Yes, this not only has this presentation been recorded, but we will also be sharing the slide deck to our Code Talk website. So please check back. I'm sure we'll be providing an update once those resources are available in the near future. The next question reads, how long will HUD allow tribes to pay employees using their IHBG funds that are home due to closures or not actively performing essential functions?
So thanks, Neil. So this question came up previously, and I think we do have an FAQ that sort of touches on it or covers part of this question. We're not setting any sort of bright line deadline for you to pay your staff. OMB recently provided additional flexibility in this area to clarify that agencies like HUD can authorize the use of grant funds for paying salaries and expenses for staff who are having to stay at home and can't perform their normal functions because of the current crisis. So we don't have a set time period. You are authorized to use grant funding to pay staff while they are at home. I think the parameters, and we addressed this in the FAQ, is that you're supposed to technically have policies in place that address it or do this in accordance with written policies, but our FAQ clarifies that you can adopt those policies now if you don't already have those policies. So we're not setting any sort of time limit. Obviously, there is a dollar limit. If you're using your block grant for these costs, these likely are considered administrative and planning costs, and there is a cap under our program for how much money you can use for this purpose. So it is an issue that you need to watch out for. The FAQ does provide that if you feel like because of the current situation you're bumping up against your admin cap, the regulations do allow you to ask for additional approval to exceed the cap. So if anybody is in that situation because of the current crisis, we certainly will consider any requests in accordance with the regulations to exceed the cap.
Okay. We have a number of questions that have come in with regard to ICDBG imminent threat. So I'll sort of clump those together with this question, which is, can you give an approximate size of the individual awards for ICDBG imminent threat that will be awarded? Will they follow the usual grant ceiling?
We're still looking at that. It's a matter that we're still exploring. I will say that, the normal caps are based on presidentially declared disasters, and you normally can spend $450,000 in a non-presidentially declared disaster area. $900,000, you get a $900,000 award if you're in a presidentially declared disaster area, and it's looking like so many states are getting declarations and more are coming. So we're looking at that, we're considering that, but it's looking very likely that most of the country, if not all of the country, may eventually end up with a presidentially declared disaster declaration. So we're taking it into account. Look out for our waiver notice that will likely address this.
Building off that question, we have a follow-up question here. When do you expect to announce FY 19-20 ICDBG awards?
Pretty soon. Heidi, do you want to address that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll address and then Hillary can jump in. So as you know, our focus has been getting the pandemic money out, the supplemental money out, but we have been able to balance that with continuing to process the applications that we got for ICDBG. So we're continuing on the same timeline and hope to get it out in the near future. There may be a slight delay, but we're hoping that there won't be a delay. Hillary, do you want to add anything?
Nope, nothing to add. That sounds right. We're trying to keep that moving as best as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a scenario question about waivers. I'm going to read this one slowly. Can you give it I'll restart that one. With regards to waivers, such as inspections, as a result from COVID-19 pandemic, what happens if we move someone in by our rental assistance program and waive the HQS inspection? When we all get back to work at full strength eventually, we go out to do the inspection and it doesn't meet the HQS standards. What then? This is just one example.
I think I would say let's wait and see what kind of relief HUD is going to provide. We don't necessarily require HQS in our Indian housing programs. You certainly can adopt HQS as part of your program, but we require that you ensure that all housing meets local standards. So to the extent you have issues in this area, they're not likely going to be HUD compliance issues. But I think just wait and see our waiver relief, and maybe that will help address some of these concerns.
Okay. The next question reads, can we use these funds to serve tribal citizens that live outside of our service area?
Presumably you're talking about Indian Housing Block Grant funding coming under the CARES Act. You normally define your service area so the new funding is going to be under the law subject to the normal program requirements, provided you can tie back to those purposes in the CARES Act, which is to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. Issues dealing with your service area are going to be normal programmatic issues, and you define your service area. So if you want to serve people outside your service area, you certainly can redefine your service area and provide IHBG-funded assistance. It's not a compliance problem.
Okay. The next question is about eligible activities, and it reads, is there a current list of eligible activities for this new funding?
Well, so we will be publishing additional guidance on that. Again, look out for our waiver notice and our implementation notice, which should be coming soon. I think the main thing is it's without a doubt that the big new thing involved in this funding is you're going to have to tie back whatever activities and projects you plan on doing with the new money back to that language in the CARES Act. You've got to use the funding somehow to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. Now, importantly, the law also states that those categories do include maintaining operations and carrying out normal NAHASDA-eligible activities during the period that the program is impacted by COVID-19. I think it will provide additional guidance in this area, but that's really intended to say, we understand that there's been disruption in your normal operations. This money can be used for normal eligible activities, provided you tie it back to the crisis. How has the crisis disrupted those activities, and are you just doing activities you would have otherwise done if it wasn't for the crisis? So I think that's how I would think about eligible activities, but we will provide additional guidance, particularly in our waiver notes.
Great. The next question is about audits, and the question reads, will there be any extensions on TDHE FY 2019 audits?
Gary, do you want to take that one? Gary's not on. Okay.
I'm sorry. I was on mute. There is an extension that is for 6 months. We issued some guidance to the area offices, and the area offices, ONAP offices, should have provided guidance to each of the recipients. If you have any questions, call the area office, but as I understand it, there is a 6-month extension on audits. If you're talking about monitoring, whether or not we're going to come out for monitoring reviews, we have suspended that schedule except for a few monitoring trips that we are going to take, or actually remote monitoring. And again, if you're on that schedule and you haven't received any guidance from your area ONAP office, contact them and ask them what is going on, and they'll be able to inform you.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
You bet.
The next question is about IHBG competitive funding, and the question reads, do you have an approximate timeline for publishing a NOFA for the FY 2020 IHBG competitive funding?
That's a good question. We initially were hoping to get this thing published maybe around May, June timeline after all of the debriefings were wrapped up from the last round. Obviously, we have got a massive disruption right now, and we also understand that there may be limitations at our grantees' ability to apply in a timely and full manner because of the current pandemic. So we're looking at that. I would not be surprised if there is a delay because we would just be intentionally delaying it to allow you guys the ability to apply for this funding under slightly more normal circumstances than we're all in right now. So Hillary, I don't know if you want to address, but I don't know if we have a specific date. I think we can comfortably say there's been disruption in the schedule, particularly since we have new funding that we would probably want to prioritize emergency funding.
And Jed, I just want to stress what you said about the debriefings as well. We're being very mindful that some of the debriefings are being postponed or rescheduled, and we really do not want to put out a competitive NOFA until we have all of those debriefings concluded. So that's also a major driver with this timeline.
Yeah, thank you both. This is Hillary. I have nothing to add. I was going to bring up the debriefings too. We want to just do what makes the most sense, quite frankly, so we're going to keep a close eye on it and see how it turns out.
Great. Thank you very much. The next question is about stimulus checks, and the question reads, the stimulus checks Americans are going to receive, will that income be counted as income per tenants in calculating rent?
That's a great question. I think we will definitely do a written FAQ on this in the next round of FAQs. We're definitely looking at it right now. Obviously, as you all know, we allow grantees to pick between one of three definitions of annual income under the Indian Housing Block Grant Program. You can pick the Section 8 definition in Part 5. You can pick the adjusted gross income definition in the IRS 1040 series, or you can pick the census definition of income. It's likely that I believe the Section 8 definition would exclude these payments as temporary, non-recurring, sporadic payments. The IRS definition would probably exclude these payments because I believe that these payments are a credit, a tax refund credit, and not taxable income, but we have to confirm that, so that's not set in stone. I need to do a little bit of research. And under the census definition, there are some exclusions for tax refunds and lump sum payments that we need to also explore. So my sense is these payments will likely be excluded from income, but stay tuned for additional guidance from us. We just need to do a little due diligence on this, and we're working on that one.
Great.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize something that Jed's response to a lot of the questions is. A lot of it depends on how the tribe's policies or how the tribe is choosing to administer their programs. So we can be helpful in kind of guiding people through, but a lot of it too depends on your policies and procedures and some of the decisions you've made on a local level of how you administer your program.
Perfect. We have one more question in the queue that I see here at the top, and the question is about the funding that comes through the CARES Act. The question wants to know, will this be subtracted from the yearly allocation, or is this additional new funding?
So this is additional new funding that will be provided as a separate grant. And it has specific purposes, again, related to COVID-19. We will not use this funding to subtract your future allocations because you receive funding under this. So this new funding is supplemental funding that is in addition to your normal funding, and it will not be used to give you less funding in the 2020 round of IHBG formula funding.
Perfect. Okay. The next question reads, generally, we are required to commit a match. Obviously, we do not project the need to commit funds, and we are a small tribe. So as a grant writer, I'm concerned about the match requirement for most grants. is there going to be a match requirement for these new grants?
I would say likely not. There's nothing in the law that requires it. We don't typically, for the Indian Housing Block Grant Program or the ICDBG program, require a match. Now, for competitive programs like the regular ICDBG program or the regular Indian Housing Block Grant competitive program, you get extra points for leveraging funds, but we have not imposed matching requirements in our program, and I don't expect we'll do the same for this CARES Act fund.
Perfect. Okay, the next question is about purchasing a property as a shelter, and the question reads, if a TDHE is planning to purchase a motel as a shelter in place for income-eligible, medically at-risk elders, is an appraisal required before a purchase agreement, or is this something that could be covered through a waiver?
It's probably good practice to do an appraisal because there's a general requirement that all costs you incur are necessary and reasonable. We don't have a separate requirement that specifically says you must have an appraisal done before you spend block grant funds on, whether it's under ICDBG or IHBG, on public facilities like this that could be used and converted and used for housing purposes, eligible housing purposes. But we don't have some sort of specific programmatic requirements for an appraisal. It's probably good practice to ensure you're not, spending way too much or overpaying for purchasing and a pretty big purchase of a public facility like this. So there's really nothing for us to waive. If the question is about waivers, there's nothing specific for us to waive. I think you just need to use good, sound business judgment to the extent you can under the current circumstances.
Okay. Okay, the next question is about unemployment benefits, and the question reads, are the employees of TDHEs that participate in a tribal unemployment insurance program as opposed to the state or federal program also eligible for the federal supplemental $600 weekly benefit for 4 months?
This is kind of a Department of Labor question that we're not equipped to answer, so I would recommend you refer that to the Department of Labor or your state local agency.
Okay, thank you. We have a follow-up question about non-program income, and the question reads, will the funds, and I'm assuming these are the new COVID-19 or CARES Act funds, be allowed to offset non-program income losses as well?
So again, this touches on the question I addressed before we started addressing the specific questions in the chat box. That there is you can't draw down money solely to reimburse yourself for lost program income or non-program income. There's got to be an eligible use of funds. To the extent you are paying for eligible costs, like paying your salaries or paying your operating expenses, with non-program income previously that you've now lost because of the current situation, you can spend your new IHBG money to cover those costs. But drawing down grant funds to reimburse lost program income or non-program income is not an eligible use of the current money or the new money.
Okay. We have another scenario here. I'm going to read this slowly. Most of our 1937 Housing Act homes are paid off. We have severally tribally funded homes. They are also paid off units that were built with 1937 Act funds. Can we use our funding on those homes if they're not in our IHP? Most of these families were over income, but now could fall within the income limits due to loss of income.
There is no prohibition against you using funding on those units. per se. The normal income requirements will apply. If people's incomes have changed because of the current situation, you certainly can recertify their income. If you've determined that they're now low income, you can provide assistance. And I would also say look out for additional guidance that we're going to put out in this particular area.
Great. Okay, the next question reads, can we cover costs such as water, sewer fees for tenants along with rent relief or other utilities as well?
Yeah, you can. If the question is on the use of IHBG funds, you certainly can provide assistance, utility assistance under the program. There are parameters for under the ICDBG program as well, where you can provide both rental assistance, utility assistance as emergency payments up to 3 months under the ICDBG program. The IHBG program doesn't have any sort of time limits on that kind of assistance, so I don't see why that assistance would not be eligible provided they're low income.
Okay. The next question is about IHBG annual allocations, and the question reads, will HUD be counting the CARES Act allocation and locked unexpended balances for the purpose of the 24 CFR 1000.342 regulation on IHB annual allocations? Can HUD issue guidance on this issue? The intent of the CARES Act funding was not to impact our existing IHB annual allocation.
That's a really good question. We will certainly look at it. This isn't necessarily a policy call on our end. It's going to be looking at the current formula regulations and assessing whether what we call the undispersed funds factor in the formula regulations would be triggered by this funding. We have to look closer at it. We'll look closer at it. I don't want to prejudge it. I wouldn't worry too much about that right now. I think the focus needs to be, obviously your focus is on getting this funding and using it for eligible purposes. We have to look closer at this.
Okay. The next question is, as a consortium, we want to make sure with ICDBG we can assist multiple tribes, and there are no restrictions like those that were put in place with the IHBG competitive last year. That's sort of a statement there, so I'm not sure if you want to.
Yeah.
That.
Okay. Do you want to address that, Heidi?
No, I was just going to say that's a good point. I think we run up against, like we did with the IHBG competitive, of appropriations language that particularly applies to Alaska Native villages and regional associations. So it's something that we've looked at, and we can look at again, but some of it is directly in response to appropriations language that we have to abide by.
Okay. We have one more question here. Will funds be eligible to cover waived rents?
I think this is related to the same issue we've addressed maybe 2 or 3 times on program income, so I just refer you to that. Again, you can waive rents. We encouraged it. We're going to provide you with additional funding that can be used to cover that shortfall. So in that sense, yes, funds can be used to cover the shortfall if you're using the funds to pay for costs that are otherwise eligible and operating costs and admin costs.
Okay. The next question reads, Has there been any discussion of using competitive funds towards funding more projects that were submitted but didn't make the cutoff so that we don't have to go through a round of competitive funding submission this year?
I assume we're talking about the next round of Indian Housing Block Grant competitive funding. Assuming we are, but that's likely not going to be the case. We run each competition as an independent competition, and the competitions change. The factors change, the criteria change, so you would have to submit another application for the next competition. However, there's nothing stopping you if you didn't get funded from using a lot of the same components of your last application. If it's the same project, you want to improve your application a little, but you are still proposing to do the same project and you reuse certain parts of your application. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're going to make all applicants apply again because it's a new competition with new factors.
Okay. The next question is about the time frame of expenses for activities related to COVID-19. And the question asks, if a tribe has already expended funds in March to combat or respond to COVID-19, are those expenses reimbursable?
That's a great question. So the law provides that the new funding can be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. But it also provides that the funds can be used to reimburse costs already incurred by the tribe or TDHE all the way back to the time that the tribe or TDHE began preparing for coronavirus. So to the extent you have incurred costs that would otherwise be eligible with this money, and you did incur those costs when you started preparing for coronavirus way before the enactment of the CARES Act last week, those funds would be reimbursable with the new money that is coming.
Perfect. The next question is about reporting requirements for the CARES Act funding. And the question reads, will there be specific reporting requirements to prove funding was spent on COVID-19 related activities?
Another great question. We are certainly looking at it. I would say it's safe to assume that we will require you to report on the things that the law requires you to do. So we will likely require that you report on activities that were done to prevent, prepare for, respond to coronavirus, or activities that were used to maintain normal operations during the time your program was impacted by coronavirus. So we're probably going to minimize burdensome reporting requirements as much as we can, but it is safe to assume that you will have to track the planning of these activities and then report on these activities on the back end. That's probably the bare minimum we would need to require for this new funding, because this is money that we're going to have to report on. This is money that is going to get audited by the OIG. This is money that will likely be subject to some congressional scrutiny and review and GAO review. So we are likely going to require you to report on at least that. I think that's safe to assume, but we're still working on that.
Okay. The next question is about imminent threat funding availability. And the question reads, if ICDBG COVID-19 funding is for emergencies that can constitute imminent threat for health and safety, what does HUD propose a tribe or TDHD should do while waiting for the grant notice? And will the current ICDBG funding still be available?
All current funding will remain available. Our suggestion would be, to the extent you can reprogram current funding that you have, for instance, your 2020 IHBG formula funding that we recently awarded. To the extent that you can reprogram that money, if it's feasible and it's something you want to do, we certainly encourage it, because we're working really, really hard to turn around everything we need to turn around to get these awards out and get this money out, but it takes a little bit of time. And in the meantime, if you have resources that are available right now, we certainly encourage you to reprogram those funds that we've made available for COVID-related purposes if there's an immediate need to do so. And we're also looking at waiver relief in that particular area to allow you to more easily do that. But stay tuned for that.
Great. The next question reads, are fund expenditures allowed for sheltering homeless or for temporary quarantine of presumed infected individuals?
Yeah, that's a current eligible use of funds, and you certainly can use your Indian Housing Block Grant funds for that purpose. You know, I think we have an FAQ on this too on our website, so it's worth reviewing that. It does address these issues.
Here's a waiver question. For the waiver of eligibility for low to moderate income, since most of our public schools are closed, how can we verify income for rental and for mortgage relief?
I certainly think that right now everything we're saying is use your best judgment and minimize the need for in-person contact. So there is no IHBG specific requirement that says you have to verify income in person. To the extent you can, do the best you can to verify income, but this is something we're also looking at. You shouldn't be subjecting your staff or residents to unnecessary in-person contact to verify income out of fear that you're not going to comply with some HUD requirement. We don't require you to do in-person income verification, and just try to minimize that as much as possible.
The next question is about being able to expend all of the funding. What happens if our tribe or TDHE is unable to spend all of the CARES Act funding?
It's a good question. I think we will get there when we get there. The money, I think our emphasis is going to be to push everybody to prioritize spending this money first, given the ongoing emergency. And so, you know, I think we're gonna encourage everybody to spend this money first and quickly. If for whatever reason you can't, then I think we will address it at a later date. I can't project what's going to happen there, but we're providing funding for you to.
Sorry, Jed. I think it's important to point out again that this funding can be used for the normal purposes under the block grant as well, as long as it's, you know, tied to COVID. So I would suspect that there is, as we know, there's great need in Indian country, that we probably will not have to worry about this. But as Jed said, we will. It's a good question, and we're working out those details now.
So we have a number of questions that have come in towards the bottom from people that joined the call a little bit late. I just want to share a reminder, though we have just a few minutes left on the call, this call has been recorded, and we're going to share that on Code Talk as well. I think we'll send it out in the coming days. But also, if you are looking for the allocation amounts, a Dear Tribal Leader was sent out just before the call, and you can also find it on HUD.gov as well for the press release, on our press release section, and on the coronavirus site as well. If you want to look through that information, we have updated FAQs there as well. So again, we have time for about 2 more questions. Next question reads, outside of utility and rental assistance, can we use the CARE Act funding for other essential items that members need, example, food for our tribe?
Again, as long as you tie the purposes back to preventing, preparing for, and responding to coronavirus, and the uses are eligible, then you're fine. You can provide housing services. Under housing services, you can provide, food delivery kinds of services to eligible folks. have an FAQ on the eligible uses of IHBG for coronavirus purposes, and we have an FAQ specifically on this question. So again, I'd recommend everybody look at those FAQs online. We'll keep updating them, but that question is addressed.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and the final question is, can we use these funds through the CARES Act to help our tribe support health clinics, purchase COVID-19 tests, vaccines, or other health-related materials?
I would say stay tuned for additional guidance on that question. We're thinking about these issues too.
We are just about at the top of the hour. Jed, would you like to take one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Most states have shelter-in-place orders. Example, if you can work from home, they strongly encourage that you do. Can some of this funding be used for information technology services that the TDHE employees can use to work from home to be in compliance with the social distance requirements and guidelines provided by the CDC?
Yeah, I don't see any prohibition against buying necessary office-related equipment as long as it's necessary for your staff to administer the program. So if we're talking about IHBG funding, as long as the equipment is necessary for them to be able to do their jobs, you certainly can buy equipment that would normally be considered overhead and come in as an admin and planning expense under your budgets. But yeah, I'm sure many folks are having to deal with this question of providing necessary equipment for staff who are staying at home and having to do their jobs from home. But our funds can be used for these purposes. If you look at Part 2 CFR Part 200, there's sort of the parameters for all these kinds of expenses.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for today.
Thank you.
Again, this call has been recorded, and we will be sharing it shortly in the near future.
And I also want to say, for those of the questions we didn't get to, please look for the next round of FAQs because we do take the ones we didn't answer and incorporate them where we can in the next round.
This is Hunter. I just want to, again, thank everyone for everything you're doing out there. You know, I've always continued to say that, you know, we have incredibly important jobs in providing people the services and the housing that we do. And I think, and what we do is incredibly important. But I think, you know, in this pandemic, what we're doing is even more important than ever before. And, you know, providing someone, you know, a house and a place to live it has a new importance that it's never had before. And I just want to thank you for what you're doing, how you're, you know, the efforts you're putting in, and I know it's difficult on all of us, and so I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you, folks.
Alrighty, guys. That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.